Good evening. My name is Joseph Vermeille, and I'm here to introduce our keynote speaker, Miss Vanessa Jean, who's going to be talking about open source technologies in higher education. Her speech will finish with a value proposition for open source technologies in higher education. What is open source? Open source is defined in opposition to closed source, where open source is when you have the source code of the program, you can change it, modify it, distribute it. This is an example of a program written in English-like language so anyone can understand what's going on. When you buy a software for Microsoft or any other source, what they give you is a compiled version of the software, which is something like this. You cannot do anything with it. You can only use it as they want you. So the person who owns the source code have property rights, intellectual property rights, ownership rights, patent and copyrights on the software. So this is the definition of open source. The open source movement allow people to get the software, to have the opportunity to modify it and to change it and to use it as they please. I have for you here on the screen a timeline of open source technologies, which started in 1911 when Henry Ford and a group of automakers launched a lawsuit to gain patent right to open the right to produce car engines. That victory led to what we have today, which is a car industry where different companies are making cars. Then during the 1950s, all software were basically produced in collaboration because the software were linked to the hardware, and the hardware manufacturers were producing the software, and there was no problem with getting the software. During the 60s, the Unix system was launched free of cost. In 1969, during the 70s, the Unix system was launched free of charge. In 1969, the US government decided that bundling software was anti-competitive. 1976, Bill Gates claimed that sharing software is like stealing. In 1986, the Free Software Foundation was formed. 1991 to 93, the Linux system, which is the backbone of open source software, was released. And in 1999, Star Office, which became Open Office as the main competitor of Microsoft Office, was launched. Adoption of open source technologies by higher education is strongly supported by current research. We have compiled an annotated bibliography which will give you an idea of what the literature is saying about open source technologies in institutions of higher learning. We have, for instance, William Shawn Van Wooji, who proposes that the main rationale for adoption of open source technologies by higher education is cost and flexibility. In other words, if dollars and cents make sense for everybody, it also makes sense for higher education. Now I will show you a brief preview of what we have for you as an annotated bibliography of open source technologies in higher education. The first article is New Options for Your Campus. The first article I reviewed for this annotated bibliography is New Options for Your Campus. The main theme which came from that article is administrative computing, TCO, total cost of ownership, software, community software, open source, and the quality financial systems. The second paper I reviewed for this the second article, Pay Nothing, Easier Said Than Done, is by Azevedo. And the theme we have from this paper is free and open textbooks. In other words, the open source movement has reached academia to the level of free and open textbooks. The third paper we reviewed was Creating Higher Education Academic and Information Technology Resources in an International Context by Bowen, Willis, Lee, 2010. The fundamental theme from that paper is open education, collaboration, and higher education. The fourth paper we reviewed was Open Source Software in Computer Science and IT higher education. That's a case study where it is considered the use of open source software as a way to educate computer science students in the design of software for real life situation. The fifth paper was Adopting Open Source Software Application in U.S. Higher Education, a cross-disciplinary review. The central theme for that paper, the fifth article was Adopting Open Source Software Application in U.S. Higher Education, a cross-disciplinary review of the literature. The central theme of that paper was adoption of learning management systems, the Sakai, Moodle, and the Quali system. And the last article we reviewed was Open Source Learning Management Systems, a predictive model for higher education. It's by Van Woods, and the theme from that paper is Criteria for Adoption of Open Source Learning Management System by Higher Education. This concludes, ladies and gentlemen, our review of the literature when it comes to open source technology adoption in higher education. I'm now going to present you academic and administrative application of open source technologies in higher education. Just a sampling of open source application for education, I can report Moodle, which is used by about 10 million learners worldwide and which is available in 90 languages. Cloudline, available in 35 languages. Sakai, which is used worldwide. Fidina, which is used by about 40,000 educational institutions worldwide. And OpenOffice and LibreOffice, which are desktop publishing software, which are free of charge and which are also available worldwide in different languages. I'm now introducing you to controversies and opportunities in open source technologies for higher education. What we have here is a graphic written by Andy Tai, depicting the software wars going on. It's a humoristic, it's a cartoon, but it's very representative of what is really going on in the market, the software industry. We have King Bill Gates in the middle, Microsoft Corporation. It is like an insurrection where you have HP, IBM, the free software movement, Sun Solar System, and Emperor or King Bill Gates the Great in the middle. Now, speaking of opportunities, the software industry, the open source movement have had ramification on other aspects of life as a movement to help those who are the weakest among us. For instance, lifehack.org argues that the movement, the idea, the philosophy of open source can apply to anything in life, any area where information is currently in the hands of a few instead of many. We can, at this point, introduce the MOOC, which is Mass Open. One interesting aspect of open source is MOOC for higher education. This is massive online open source open courses, which is being offered by many academic institutions. We have Coursera, Khan Academy, Udacity, and EDX, and these are institutions offering courses online where anyone can take them. I'm not sure, you don't have academic credit per se, but they give you the knowledge that you need. Just to recap, we introduce open source technologies, definition, timeline, overview, academic and administrative applications, opportunities, controversies, and now we're ready to offer you a value proposition for the adoption of open source technologies in higher education. This is what we'll be proposing as a value proposition for open source technologies in higher education. Cost is cheaper or nothing, you pay for it. Security, quality, customability, interoperability, auditability, support options, service continuity, testability, huge tax benefits, continuous improvement, lower total cost of ownership, massive open online courses, capability to improve enrollment via participation, and the ability to build on existing projects. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to welcome our keynote speaker, Ms. Vanessa Jane, who will be talking about open source technologies in higher education. Thank you.